Not so long ago, I was asked to do an observation in a nursery setting. It was about a little boy who found sensory play really difficult. He'd avoid going to the sensory table, he didn't want to seem to get his hands mucky or dirty, didn't want to join in with other children. When I went to do the observation, I stood at the doorway and I just looked at the children that were in the setting. And before I even knew who I was meant to be observing, I noticed two young children walking across the centre of the room. And as I was watching, one young lad, he put his hand to the side of his head, and then after he'd gone past the sensory tray, he put his hand back down again. And I thought, oh gosh, if that's the case, then how am I going to get through this if he can't even stand looking at the sensory tray? And after a little while I carried on observing, and what I was seeing was the fact that he was not just ignoring the sensory tray, but anything that he had decided to play with he was taking into darker areas of the room. So anything from building blocks to toys to cars to whatever it was that he was interested in. And I noticed that he preferred these dark areas, these corners, these areas where there weren't bright lights. And I had a look to see where the sensory play table was, and the sand and the water were underneath a window, and coming through the window was bright light. So I thought, okay, well, let's think a little bit out of the box here and see what we've got. And instead of encouraging him over to the sensory table, I suggested that we actually move the sensory table to where he was playing, and that was duly done. And when it was there, and for the first time ever, he was up to his arms in sand and mud and water. And it wasn't for the fact that he had a sensory sensitivity to mud and water and tactile and messy play. The relationship was actually between his senses and the bright light coming in from the window. And once we'd moved the tray over to the other side of the room, he was fine with it. So it's interesting when we're thinking about sensory integration that sometimes the behaviour that we're noting is not that obvious. We need to think out of the box and decide what it is that we're seeing.